All right, let's go on to our next presentation. This is how does generative AI change how students search for academic sources? And we have two presenters from the libraries. First is Megan Heuer. And she is the Director of Educational Initiatives and Communication Arts Librarian at SMU's Fondren Library. She collaborates with professors and students in communication arts, manages librarians at the Fondren Library, and works with the guides team. She holds a master's in library science degree and has been instrumental in developing information literacy programs, including workshops on topics such as Adulting 101 and Finding Balanced News. And second, we have Julia Anderson. She serves as the social sciences research librarian at SMU's Fondren Library, specializing in subjects like anthropology, sociology, psychology, human rights, women's and gender studies, ethnic studies, counseling, and dispute resolution. She leads workshops on generative AI for research, helping scholars integrate new technologies into their work. Anderson earned her degree from SMU and has contributed to various research initiatives, including collaborations on gender studies courses, and we welcome them.
So the previous conversations that we've been having is a great segue to kind of what we're going to talk about now. We're going to move kind of from this focus on writing to more of a focus on search. We're going to talk a little bit about some tools that are available. So we have to log into some things. If y'all need to take like a restroom break, grab some water, something like that, it will be just a few minutes before we get started.
Okay.
I think it's here.
Yeah. Yeah, that was. All right, we are going to go ahead and dive in. As Julia had said, we're going to be doing a lot of looking at specific tools. If you're the kind of person that likes to follow along, feel free to have your device ready and open. You can even have the library website opened up in preparation for some of the things we're going to do. But if you don't have a device, no problem. We're going to be showing a lot of stuff up here as well. So our agenda for today, I'm going to start by talking about how generative AI impacts information search and how our students think about information kind of more broadly. We are going to be looking at generative AI search tools in library databases. This is hot off the presses, people. Some of these just came out like in the last week. So I have some answers. If you have questions that I can't answer, then I can certainly find out and get back to people if you have the burning questions about those. And then Julia is going to turn to looking at other generative AI search tools that might be useful for both your students and for yourself. And then we're going to do a little bit of hands-on looking at kind of the results and how they're functioning and just the kind of relevancy of the kind of things that they're pulling. So we're going to dive into that world. All right, so I want to start with us kind of thinking together about this question of how have you noticed students using AI for information search? So I pulled this survey from the Digital Education Council. Those of you who went to the OIT event last week, this may look familiar. But as you can see, according to this survey, 69% of students are using AI in terms of search for information. And of course, as a librarian, I'm like, well, that's too generic. How do we boil that down? And so search for information can look like a lot of different things. So I will just say I have taught a couple of classes working with students on introducing them to generative AI and information search. And I did a little survey, mostly because I was super curious. And by and large, the things that I was hearing from students about what this looks like is that they're not using it to find citations. And I gave them lots of other options. But by and large, the biggest one is to understand concepts. So their search for information looks like I go into generative AI and I ask generative AI to explain to me the things that we're talking about in class that I'm not getting. Is probably mostly what that looks like. But I want to open up to you. Have you had experiences in interacting with your students and how they're using AI in terms of their search for information? Yeah.
Use it to ask, like, how do you do something? whether it's write a piece of code or understanding concepts, like how do I prove such and such, like how do I do something?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that line is getting a lot more blurred. Even if they do try to Google something, now Google is having first results, they generative AI instead of an actual result.
Yes.
So they might not even be aware of what they're using.
Yes. Yes. And that's a great point, and that's goes right into the next thing I'm about to talk about. So yes.
I've had students using it to generate more problems similar to the ones that they have been working on.
Mm-hmm.
Extra practice, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's a very smart way of using it. So I think it's really important for us to be thinking about this, and because the thing that I see coming is this idea of how students are interacting with information and how they're searching for information is about to massively change. It's already changing, and how they conceptualize of information. And so, and as we kind of think about information and information search super broadly, it involves even my everyday life and how do I know things and where do I go to find those things that I know. And so some of what I've been thinking about a lot recently is the idea of, like, remember when the internet happened and we were all upset about Wikipedia, and the internet introduced this new way of thinking about who can publish, new ideas about authority, who has authority, new ideas about the authority of a crowd, and how valuable is that? And we just, new ideas about my access to information and the very long tail of the things that I can find. And it rocked our worlds, and it rocked our worlds in academia. And the thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that coming of AI and how that's going to change our students' perceptions and concepts about what information is and how I receive it and how I perceive of it. So in thinking about that more broadly, I have a list here of information search skills. These are the skills that you need to be a good searcher of information, right? These are the things that when we do research, and perhaps you kind of start to take it for granted that you're doing all this stuff, but you have to employ strategy and you're doing your search. You have to think about, where am I going to go? Who might have published about this, et cetera? What kind of publication? Maybe a newspaper might be the place to find that kind of information. AI, we use AI for information search. Being strategic starts to matter less because I have a tool that is feeding me answers, right? Manipulate search tools. Our search tools are becoming more and more based on how humans think and how humans interact. So right now, and we teach this a lot, you have to take, what does my information need, and how do I translate that into a way that the machine will give me what I need? I have to start thinking, how does a database work? I mean, we teach this. How does the database work so I can get it to work for me? AI is kind of moving away from that, right? Explore and organize information in order to better understand and refine your question. This is one a lot of times students don't realize this is the thing they should be doing. We have to go out there and explore before we can find answers. We can put into ChatGPT, I can say, give me all the subtopics related to what I am researching. I don't have to go out and interact and kind of do this long process of sifting through lots of things of actual pieces of information. I can just get answers, right? Identify sources' main ideas and relevance to the question. Well, AI is starting to summarize for us, just trying to tell us what the main idea is. I'm sure if I put it in there, here's my research question, is this thing relevant to it, and uploaded the document? I mean, I don't know. I haven't tried this. We should try this, see how good it is. I don't know how good it would do right now. But the other thing, and the caveat I will say, is, of course, AI is the worst it's ever been right now, right? It's only going to get better with some of this stuff. Situate information within the context of the author's authority, purpose, stance, evidence, method. This, of those of us who think this way, is so critical, right? It's not just the information itself, but the context that it came from is huge. And this is, as I'm thinking about what AI does, it focuses us more onto the actual information, the answers. and it's removed the context of the container that it came from. Now, some good tools will still give you that. This is the one I'm thinking about a lot, because as we move into an AI world in which we're getting answers, we're starting to dissolve that relationship between the information itself and the container that it came from. And as we talk about our students, they're getting answers from Google, and it's right there, and they're not even, like, that was the thing when this first came out that I was most, I'll say, afraid of, but losing that connection. I don't know if AI can do this. What do you think? No, this is pretty sophisticated. Not yet. Analyze and synthesize sources for understanding. Okay, well, it will synthesize your sources for you. But then I said for understanding, and that's for the students' understanding. And this gets me to the other point of the things that I'm thinking about with this. So much of research takes time, and it takes struggle. And that's when you come to understanding, is through the time and the struggle. And so as we start to shortcut some of these things, yes, we can become in some ways more productive. Are we still getting actual understandings? Or students even more, because students now, some really good students can create a facsimile of understanding and not really truly understand it themselves. Of course, we all know that. But AI makes that more easily done. And so my next thing to think about is, of those things, which skills are still valuable for students to develop rather than relying on AI shortcuts? And there may be some that we can let go of and some that we cannot. And so for those that we cannot, and it depends on the priorities of your course and your assignment and what you choose for them to be learning in that moment. But we of course know that students will use principle of least effort and use these tools to do the thing that will give them the shortest way to the final product. But if we're thinking about how to retain these skills, how will students learn them and how will they be motivated to use them? I'm not presenting answers on all of this. I have lots of opinions about this. It's not the goal of us today, but I wanted to start us with this before we dive into all these tools that you can use for information search. I want us to be thinking about those skills that are behind that and how do we maintain that. And I know a lot of focus is on writing and how we're maintaining students' writing skills. Well, research skills are also very complex. They happen over time. They're iterative. It has a whole bunch of things that come into it. And just like writing, I encourage you to think about my students' interactions with information, how they're taking in information themselves, how they're searching, because I think it's going to be even more critical for us to start thinking about how are we teaching information literacy, which does include information that comes from AI, into the classroom. So that is I will get off my soapbox now. But if you are interested in thinking about this more, we do offer a stipend program. And so if this is a thing you want to wrestle with in your classroom and how can I start addressing these information skills in my classroom, we would love to talk to you, and we have a stipend to support that. So talk to me if you're interested in more information about that. But now let's get to AI tools for information search. And I'm going to start us off by a short message about the fact that AI search tools work differently than ChatGPT. So it seems like we have fairly sophisticated AI users in here. So I'll go through this quickly, but ChatGPT works very differently than these other tools that I am talking about. When you put in a prompt into regular ChatGPT, it is using its training data to answer you. These tools do not work this way. So for these tools, the citations are always real. The hallucinations are much less likely. They can still happen, but it happens a lot less. So that's usually the first question I get. Does it hallucinate? Well, it's always possible, but probably not. So these kind of tools are based on what's called retrieval augmented generation. So that means the AI tool, the large language model, has a knowledge base that it's pulling answers from, or that's pulling from. And so when you put a query into it, it first goes to its knowledge base. So I'm going to show you library databases. In the case of the library databases, the knowledge bases all the things in that database. So it is only pulling relevant information from that database and all of the articles and book chapters and all of that stuff that's in there. So it first goes, finds relevant information and uses that in order to generate an answer. And it will also provide you cited sources that are real citations. All right. So ChatGPT, different. Now, if you push the little internet button in ChatGPT, or if you use Perplexity, that is using retrieval augmented generation. It is pulling actual things from the internet. But of course, for academic search, we don't want just searching websites. We want them searching actual scholarship, right? And so the things that we're focusing on today are things that actually pull scholarship.
Right, some of the tools that we'll talk about today pull from this corpus of knowledge called Semantic Scholar, right? And so what it is it has a bunch of different papers. Usually they're open access, usually they're very specific to sciences, sometimes social sciences, so a lot of humanities scholarship is left out. But the idea is that it's hitting on those academic bases first, and that's where it's pulling the sources of information for retrieval.
Yeah. So like when I talk to students about you're like evaluating the tool you're using, when you're using one of these tools, the great first question is, well, what is it pulling from? What's its knowledge base? And what do I know about that?
Right. Second question would be, what is it leaving out?
Yes, because sometimes a lot. Okay, so I'm going to turn to AI tools that are now in the library databases. So I'm going to go through and show you briefly the things that have just come out with ProQuest. So anything ProQuest is going to be the aggregate databases only. So databases that pull together a bunch of different kinds of things all into one kind of thing. So not like our newspaper, like a specific newspaper. So I'll show you ProQuest, JSTOR. This we just got turned on this week. So those of you who are JSTOR lovers, that's actually of these three, this one's my favorite one. So go make yourself a personal login. You have to do that, log in through our library, but then create your kind of personal account. And then you'll be able to see the AI tools that I'm going to show you here. And then EBSCO. EBSCO is my least favorite of these three. Please, EBSCO, become better, do better. So, but we will do a brief look at that. There are also some business databases for those of you in business that have started to incorporate that. I will also say we are currently investigating an option, an AI option for library search. So library search is our big search box on the library homepage that searches across everything. It's not quite ready yet. It needs to get a little better. So far looks very promising though, in terms of making especially our newbie searchers find stuff much more easily. So I'm going to turn to just showing you some things. Well, we're going to do a quick tour because I want to give Julia more time. Okay, so for ProQuest, the ones we're talking about like art bibliography, ABI Inform, ProQuest 1. I'm going to go ahead and go into ABI Inform. It doesn't really matter what I search for. So in this particular database, it's not the search itself that's AI. It is once you click into a result, you're going to have what's called Research Assistant. And so what this is going to do is give you key takeaways, suggested sources, indexing terms. I actually love this. This pushes people toward the actual, like, you know, the subject terms that were applied by the, it will help make your search better. So my quick takeaway from this, the summary is not bad. The summary's in EBSCO. I'm not a fan, but you know, but the summary's not bad. The suggested sources are sometimes crazy. It's a little wild sometimes good, sometimes wild. This I feel like is great. And then we can click brainstorm research topics based on this document. This document seems easy. Let's see how it does. You have to, did you open up a search result and then? I've seen it be kind of inconsistent, but if like you scroll down is where it found it, it may not give the same exact thing for every, I mean.
No, it's like from a microfilm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You will also see, and I'll say generally, Sometimes the AI, you'll like, why is it putting this AI enabled stuff on this thing, but not this thing? There's all kinds of licensing reasons why. They had to go to the publishers and get permission with every single publisher to be able to have it, and some publishers didn't allow it. So there'll be inconsistencies there, and also has to be full text in that database. So possible research topics based on this document. This to me seems like potentially useful for students who are struggling with thinking, coming up with ideas, right? Okay, so that is ProQuest, JSTOR. Ooh. Did I spell it right? Yet again, it is, for this particular stage of things, it's when you click into a document itself that you're gonna trigger the AI. Some of these, I will say, this is just the current iteration. Some of these are also, they're starting to work on AI-supported search itself. So mostly we're looking at document-based support, but eventually it's gonna also be how the thing searches. So this, what I love about JSTOR is it takes your, whatever you searched, and then relates it to this text, your search terms and how it relates to this text. So especially for the humanities where you're digging through, I mean, that feels very useful even for all of us, right? You can ask questions down here. So this one is the only one that's interactive. You can also summarize. And the summary is really short. Show related content. For some reason, the related content in these tools is, they gotta work on that. Recommended topics, always useful. These things for brainstorming, always kind of useful to me. Because it doesn't hurt, you know? So that is JSTOR. EBSCO. The stage that EBSCO's at right now, it's also AI Insights. I find their summaries to be a bit of a word salad. I mean, I feel like I get more if I just read the abstract. But there, you know, not every article has an abstract, and it's being super slow. And you'll see like some of these don't have it if it's not full text, or they didn't have the licensing to do it. So you just click into the AI Insights, it has bullet points from there. The other thing that's coming with EBSCO that I am more excited about is they're gonna have AI enabled search, in which the students can just type a question into the search box. Thank you. Yes, because they do this anyway, people. We try to teach them how to like boil it down to their key terms, and we have we can poll things and we see what by and large they're doing, and they're still putting questions in there. So that is a brief tour of what is coming from where. Let me see, I'm gonna have to find our presentation again. Oh, we're Heuer. And as I said, coming soon, library search. I will say the cool thing with what's coming soon with library search is it will be a AI supported search plus like summaries. You can type in other languages in it. And yeah, so yes. Yeah. Reason to be excited about the future for some of these things. And I just will say briefly, oh, question, yes.
Recording.
Yeah. You might not turn on.
No.
So you mentioned that there's a difference between like, I think the words are generative AI, which is creating answers to your query, versus the retrieval augmented, whatever it was, which is it goes to a knowledge base to pull. It's like doing it's basically doing like a better Google search essentially, right? Like, but with some additional tools to help synthesize and summarize and things like this.
All right, let me break this down.
Yeah.
Let's think there's two kinds, long context and retrieval augmented generation. And regular ChatGPT is long context. You can have a conversation back and forth and it will remember and it'll be more conversational and it'll be like kind of more sophisticated in that way. Retrieval augmented generation was an attempt to try to like stop hallucinations, and it's pulling from its knowledge base. And so when you have tools with that, some of them you can't have, most of them you can't have a long conversation with them. They're just not built for that. It's more like bringing in, but the huge difference is the one kind will use its training data to answer your question, and retrieval augmented generation it will pull first what is relevant from the knowledge base. So it will pull actual sources in order to answer the question from that knowledge base. And then it will summarize, et cetera, do all the things, try to answer your question depending on the tool. And you'll see some of that from the things that Julie is going to show you. Does that answer your question?
That's really helpful because just in terms of learning the vocabulary, figuring out what type of tool am I using. So that was really helpful. So to follow up, how do we know? I know like ChatGPT is supposed to tell you like when it was last updated, like in terms of its like training data for these retrieval augmented generation tools. How do we know how recent how up to date their knowledge base is?
Great question. And it depends on the thing. So, and that's part of evaluating that. So if it's from our database, it's like, well, it's whatever's in the database, right? It's, but for Semantic Scholar, I mean, and I'll let Julia, like, what do you know about Semantic Scholar? It's hard. Semantic Scholar is hard to see inside.
So generally for generative AI search tools that are not connected to the library, so like we're gonna look at Undermine and Elicit and Notebook LM, as was mentioned earlier, they have pretty thorough about pages, and I chose those tools because they're so explicit about what they do include, what they don't include, how often their data is uploaded, things like that, right? There are sketchier tools for sure that do not have that information in their about section. They're not very explicit about what's included, how it's being updated, things like that. So it really depends on the tool. You want to make sure that you're researching the tool that you're using. And then, I mean, if you have questions, usually the tools, especially the ones we're talking about today, have like videos about how to figure things out or have those tutorials that are helpful in figuring out exactly how to use the tool.
Yeah. So some of what we're teaching is like, how do you evaluate even the AI tool that you're using? And that's part of that process.
Exactly.
So,
I
yeah.
was just gonna ask, where does Perplexity and I guess Claude, but where do they fall in this?
Perplexity is retrieval augmented generation, and its knowledge base is the internet.
So not as academic.
And so, and it actually connects with Semantic Scholar. I personally have found it to be not as great for using it for academic purposes as just general internet searching. I know people really love it for all the teaching stuff, and I can see it working well for that, but it's just like the relevancy for that. But that is that. And Claude is just long context. It's whenever you have these long conversations back and forth.
I've never used Claude. I just know it sounds academic, but I've
I
used
haven't used it
Perplexity.
either, but it is in that group.
Thank you. There's a lot of repositories that can be tapped into, like the National Academy of Sciences, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Spencer Foundation in Chicago. These are all places in my field for education, right? You can go through. So part of the process with this, which I like, is that you can get your graduate students more than the undergraduate. When I'm thinking about master students or PhD students who are really honing in on a particular audience. So my audience is K-12 science teachers and STEM teachers. And there's a lot of materials that are there. So that's why I like this RAG. What you're talking about is if you know your audience and you know the source, then you want to go to that source where it's all pulled together. So the Carnegie Corporation in New York has a website called Open Access Science. And it's everything that goes there is free. So it's really powerful for classroom teachers to be able to get curriculum materials, lesson plan designs, other kinds of resources that they can use right away. So I really like these ideas that there's now these academic scholarship bases, but they're not just at libraries.
And I would say if you're finding, I want students searching for things that are on the internet, like the free internet, then at that point, probably Perplexity is the tool for doing that, because some of the ones Julie is showing, they're not searching the internet, they're searching Semantic Scholar only.
Right, and
Yeah.
Semantic Scholar might include some of the things that you mentioned,
Yes.
especially if they're open access, that's kind of where their focus is gonna be at, right? Because then they're not paying for different things. So it could be included as a part of the corpus. That would include going in and kind of exploring and seeing if you're
Yeah.
seeing those resources there. Part of that evaluation that we were talking about.
Yeah.
But open access sources are free game, right?
Yeah.
So
But I will say it is, and the librarians hate this, I like to know with the tool, I like to be able to know exactly who your list of publishers, exactly that. You cannot do that with these tools. It's kind of stinks, I hate that. So just briefly, as we turn on these tools, some of what we're thinking about and may help you to kind of think about is, can an AI tool get a novice searcher farther than they would on their own? Like, that's usually how we think about it. Not the ideal, like, well, they should really know how to use this tool. And yes, you could probably do more sophisticated searching and but it may help those who are just floundering. And if they offer expert searchers benefits of having a different search option. So let's get to the rest of this.
yeah, okay, so we're gonna be talking about 3 tools, and it's kind of gonna be at lightning speed. But please feel free to follow along if you're able to. Elicit, when I created an account probably about a year ago, it made me wait, but it might not make y'all wait. So go ahead and try doing that. Undermine is another tool that we're gonna look at, so you could Google that and try and create an account. And then Notebook LM, if you have a Google account, it should be really easy to pull up Notebook LM. So just a few definitions that might be helpful for the conversation that we're gonna have today. Large language models is going to be kind of that extensive data set that we're talking about. So we've mentioned Semantic Scholar, we've mentioned kind of those databases, but I'm gonna mention large language models a lot because that's where these tools are kind of pulling the data that they're using from. A lot of the tools that we'll talk about today are compatible with Zotero. So if you're not familiar with Zotero, it is a free citation manager. So it offers all of those typical citation manager options. And then LibKey is a browser extension that gives kind of one-click access to full text scholarly content. So a lot of the tools that we're going to look at, the first two anyway, focus on kind of the source retrieval, right? But they're not going to always provide access because a lot of that access is provided through institutional affiliation. So if you have LibKey downloaded, we have a research guide in case you don't know how to do that, then you can kind of one-click access that source. Yes, LibKey has saved me many, many times. So if you don't use it, you definitely should.
It's super easy to Google LibKey browser extension.
Yep, you just say that you're affiliated with SMU and it'll download. It connects you directly to our databases. So if you like do PubMed searching, or if you're on like Wikipedia, kind of scrolling through some of the sources, it'll pop up with a little green flame saying, hey, we have this, and it makes it pretty easy. Cuts out some of those extra steps. Okay, great. So the first tool that we're going to talk about is Elicit, and this is an academic search engine. What's really great about this is that it's using natural language searching. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but a lot of students will kind of go in and be like, you know, what's the effect of this thing on this other thing as the research question, right? They're not breaking things up into keywords when they're putting it in a library search. They're just typing in the whole question. That is a battle that we fight many, many times. So this idea that they're using natural language as a part of searching actually is really helpful, right? So instead of thinking about your research question in terms of keywords, you're just popping in the whole thing as you would naturally maybe ask the question. You do need an account with Elicit, and there are subscription tiers, but we're going to be using the free option. All the things that we're talking about today are the free options, so don't feel like you need to pay for it if you want to use it. There are options for free use. Typically, you're going to use Elicit for searching, for literature reviews, for systematic reviews. It's kind of opening you up to a large corpus, a large body of work to pull information from. Some of the benefits, it offers summaries, there's filters, you can create a table. We'll show you all of this in a minute. You can extract data from PDFs. So if you have a PDF that you really like, you can upload it, add it to the table, do things like that. It comes up with a concepts list, which is a little bit better than what we were seeing in some of the library databases. You can actually chat with papers, so you can ask questions about like methodology or study population. And then of course it works with Zotero as well. So if you, I believe so. Now I have to figure out where it is. Yeah. Oh yeah, elicit.com.
It's elicit.com.
Mhm. There might be. some of the limitations of the tool, and we'll kind of talk about this more extensively, it's specific to empirical studies, right? So if you're really interested in theoretical studies and pulling that in for your research, this is not the place for you. It's going to only consult the abstract for the summary features that it offers because the abstract is free and the article is usually behind a paywall, right? So they can't provide you a summary of the whole article if it's located behind a paywall. There are free account limitations and it's usually an English language focus. So if you're doing research outside of the English language, then this might also not be the tool for you. So let's take a look at the actual tool itself. So here you would type in your research question as a kind of a natural question, right? Or you could upload a PDF and extract some data from it. I'm going to pull a question that I've already done so that I can show you some of the features. Sometimes with this tool and with Undermine, it takes a while to load, right? Because it's looking through a large body of data. So that's why I'm going to pull something that I've already done to kind of have it preloaded so we can go through all the different parts. So here you'll see the question at the top, and it automatically provides this summary for you of the top 4 papers that it identifies as relevant to your question. This is based on a semantic relationship between the words that you use and the words that are used to kind of index the sources in their body. It is proprietary information. We will never know, unless I guess you work for Elicit, exactly how they're pulling the data, right? So this is part of that evaluation. You got to make sure that what it's saying is relevant is actually relevant to what you want. Along with this summary at the top, and you'll see that there are those in-text citations there, it also creates this chart. And I think this is probably uniquely what is most useful for Elicit, other than the concepts, which we'll look at in a second. But you'll notice that it lists the papers that it thinks is relevant to your research question. And then it also provides this abstract summary, right? If you scroll to the top, you can filter for different sources within this table. So does it have a PDF? When is it being published? The journal quality, right? As well as the study type. And I think this is probably really interesting too, are the keywords. So if you're really interested in maybe how this works, this specific question, the effectiveness of activity trackers, right? Then you might throw in effectiveness as your keyword and it'll pop up all of those sources that have effectiveness actually listed in the source, right? So you can really kind of filter the sources that you're looking at in this chart. You can also manage the columns. This is really helpful for the systematic review process, I think. So what you can do is, let's say you're really interested in the methodology that these tools are using, or the sources, you can click on methodology and it adds it a part of the chart here. And if it loads, then it'll tell you the methodology that it's using in the source. Now, again, this is based on the abstract that's free, right? So if the abstract does not mention the methodology, then this column will not be helpful. But if it does, then you'll see that you can really kind of take a look at all of the types of methods that are being used in these studies. And then maybe from this point, that's where you can use that keyword filter because you're really interested in, controlled trials or things like that. So that's the chart. There's a lot of other stuff to talk about, but that's just kind of a quick overview of how that works. So what you can do from here is then you can take a look at these unique concepts, right? So what it does is it kind of refers back to your research question. And then it'll take a look at 84 papers, in this case, that it thinks is related to your research question. And then what it's doing is it's coming up with unique concepts. So in this case, we're seeing things like tracking progress over time, social sharing, and competition, right? And then what it's doing is it's directly relating it to a specific source, unless in this case, it's saying this is based on our language model. So again, this is that semantic relationship, right? They're like, oh, we think that this concept might be useful for this research question that you're having based on the data that we're working with. So this could be really helpful if you have a very broad research question and you're trying to figure out more a specific thing to focus on. The concepts is really helpful. And it's pretty extensive as well. Let me see if we can get a little further. Okay, great. So some other things that it does, again, you can extract data from uploaded papers. I think you have a cap of like, I think it's 10 PDFs a month. So what you can do is you can upload 10 PDFs that you like, and then what you can do is you can create that chart based on those PDFs, right? Yes, that's with the free account. Right, exactly. With all of the tools, if you pay, you can do way more than what they're offering with the free account. But 10 PDFs a month isn't really that bad in my opinion, because other tools are like, you can have 2, and then that's not very helpful. Okay. Yeah, so back up at the chart there, if you click on, I think it's up to 4 papers with the free version, you can actually have it summarize the abstracts from those selected papers. So if that chart becomes too much, then you can really narrow it down to the 4 papers that you think might be most useful for your research question. And then you can also chat with papers too. Again, it's a 4 max. So you would select the 4 papers, and then you can ask questions like what methodology was used? What were the findings? What were the, major results? Things like that. You'll see that it's still in the beta phase. So sometimes you get some weird answers, but it's kind of one way to kind of work towards maybe focusing on specific papers that you might want to use for your own research, or showing graduate students how to do that on their own. Okay. So let's talk real quick about Undermine. So Undermine is similar to Elicit, but also offers some very big differences. Let me hit back on our PowerPoint real quick. So again, it's another academic search engine. But in this case, instead of using those natural language questions, what you're doing is you might pop in your natural language question to begin with, but then Undermine is going to work with you to create a very specific, very complex research question. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. You do need an account with this one. I believe it gives you like a month free. It kicked me out, but Megan still has access. So we're working on exactly the length of that free account. But again, this is going to be useful for narrowing your research question and for those really in-depth systematic reviews or meta-analyses. It includes like a reference list, and it offers a percentage matching. So if you put in your very complex research question that you've worked with Undermine, right, it'll provide you a list of papers, and it'll be like, this paper 100% matches your research topic. You scroll down, this paper 42% matches your research topic, right? So this kind of gives you a good way to kind of gauge maybe what papers to really pay attention to. So again, it's only using the abstract as a summary because, again, the abstracts are free, a lot of free account limitations, mostly English language focused, very sciences focused, and the search can't be adjusted. With Elicit, you can adjust your search. With Undermine, you cannot. It's the one search, and then you have to conduct something completely different. So I'm going to go to the history since I still have these up. And so you'll see at the top, there is a very detailed research question here, right? You want empirical qualitative studies that examine this thing using this specific, feminist theory lens. The study should offer this perspective. I did not start with this research question. I was like, what are the experiences of transient, women care workers, things like that. So Undermine kind of goes back and forth and really helps you narrow it down, gives you some examples, asks you questions, that sort of thing. Here you can.
And it helps you refine
Yes.
the problem.
Yes, exactly.
It's
And
amazing.
yeah, and it's refining it based on its own tool, right? So like this question might be way too narrow for, depending on what your research is, right? But for the tool, this is what it requires to pull the most relevant results. And that's what Undermine really is like saying about its own tool is it's like, hey, this is great for systematic analyses because it will pull everything that's possibly related to your research question. So that's why it gets so specific to really make sure that it's honing in on those things. So based on the results that it identifies as relevant to your research question, you can get a detailed summary. There are different categories of papers. So you can see that some of them are like empirical, some of them are legal frameworks, right? It provides a timeline of kind of the development of ideas based on that paper, on those papers that are related to your research question, plus this really handy graphic that kind of helps you along with like citations and influences and things like that. I think that is, oh yeah, and then it tells you a little bit about the discovery process, right? So in this case, it's saying that it's only 86% complete, meaning that there's more papers that could be discovered, but I think it's probably because I ran out of my free account access that it is like no more. But this is where kind of Undermine really gets helpful, right? Here you see the list of references that it's providing. You'll see that some of the references at the top are 100% topic match. And what they're saying is these sources really need your attention. This might be really useful for your research question. It provides a summary of how it's relevant, again, based on the abstract. And you'll notice that some of the sources are not in English, right? So it's pulling from kind of a large corpus, but it's going to be English language focused. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're going to use this tool. This is where LibKey really comes in handy, and with Elicit as well. What you can do is you can click on these sources and it'll pull it up in Semantic Scholar like we were talking about earlier. And if I had LibKey downloaded, then in a corner, it would pop up with a little green flame that would say, oh, hey, SMU has access to this. So you can click on that green flame and it'll pull the source up for you in library search. So instead of having to take that title, go back, translate it, do whatever you need to do, it pulls it directly from library resources. So it just kind of cuts out some of those steps. So I know we want to talk about this more, but real quick, let me cover the last tool that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to skip through our exercise and maybe we can come back to that. So the last one we're going to take a look at is Notebook LM. And so rather than being specifically for search, this is going to be more about comprehension and synthesis, right? So this is something that a lot of undergraduate students are using. We've had conversations with quite a few of them. So this is something that they're aware of. And maybe it might be a good idea that we kind of play with it a little bit to know what it offers. So the research tool is going to offer kind of a 3-panel layout. It'll provide sources, a chat option, and a studio option in which you can create or generate content. You do need a Google account, and there's a lot of free options, but there are more options with the premium version. So it's going to be for research organization, if you're trying to synthesize things, if you want to generate summaries or FAQs or timelines. But it's also, and I thought this was really interesting, great for transcripts and interviews. So if you upload a bunch of transcripts, let's say you're doing your research, right? You upload a bunch of transcripts that have already been, transcribed, then you can have that be a part of the corpus that it's looking at. And then you can ask it questions about like, how many interviewers said this? What kind of major themes are you seeing in these transcripts, right? So if you're doing a lot of interviews, this might be a good tool for you to use. Yeah. I know it's like, look at all of these things. Also, please remember that they are not forthcoming about what they do with your data. So if there's something sensitive that you don't think Google should have access to, don't use the tool. So some of the benefits is, so like with Elicit and Undermine, they're using a specific corpus. They're using Semantic Scholar, right? With Notebook LM, you're creating that corpus. You're uploading about 50 PDFs. I think that's the max per notebook. And then you can kind of ask questions or chat with it or create timelines or things from that specific corpus, right? So instead of being very general, it's very specific to maybe what your research question is or what you're interested in. It provides inline citations, and a big one is that it works with books. Both Undermine and Elicit do not include books as a part of their data set, right? And I know a lot of humanities people are like, what? So Notebook LM is different, right? Now it's not going, you can't upload a book and have that be one of your sources, unfortunately, but what you can do is use a book and maybe take important quotes from that text, put it into a Google Doc, and then upload that Google Doc, and then that can be referred to when you're chatting or asking questions or creating timelines. So there's kind of a workaround there. So you can't work, some of the limitations are you can't work across notebooks. Everything that you do is within that specific notebook, and we'll take a look at what that looks like in a second. There are file size and source number limitations. I think it's like, 500,000 words, which is like 1,000-page paper. Like that's one of the limits, right? But another limit that maybe is more limiting is you can only upload 50 different sources, right, per notebook. There's no automatic updating. So if you upload a Google Doc and then later on you make changes to that Google Doc, Notebook LM will not know about those changes. You'll have to sync it or re-upload, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that might be a little agitating is that it doesn't save any sort of chat history. So ChatGPT saves your chat history, right? Other kind of tools save your chat history. Notebook LM does not. So if there is something that you find interesting, then they encourage you to create a note from that and then upload it as a part of the sources. And I'll show you what that looks like. Again, this is also based off of only text information. So if you're uploading web pages, none of the images are going to be included. It's just the text. So let's see if I can do this in like 3 minutes. What? Yeah. Okay. There's so many things. What do I choose to talk about? Okay, so here's the panels that we were talking about, right? Sources on the far side, chat in the middle, studio on the other side. Here are a bunch of sources that I uploaded from Undermine and from Elicit, right? So you can kind of use these together. And then what you're able to do here is chat about those sources. So I'm just going to use some of the predetermined chats here. So how do these caregiving arrangements impact families? And then once it creates an answer, you'll see that there are inline text citations, meaning that it's pulling directly from your sources. Exactly. And showing you the answers to those questions, right? So if you have that question, it provides an answer that you like, it'll tell you where the source is, and maybe you can focus on that for your own research. Excuse me.
And I will say I've done this and tried asking it questions that could not be answered by the sources I uploaded. And it told me, you don't have information about that.
Yeah, again, it's working from its own sources, right? So if it's not mentioned in those sources, it'll be like, sorry, I can't provide that answer to you, which is good, right? Other than lying to you. So again, if the chat doesn't save, so if you're interested in using this as a part of your sources, they encourage you to save it as a note and then upload to your sources on the side here. It's Google, so it's very friendly in terms of interface. I was really able to figure it out very quickly. So if you're very familiar with like Google tools, I think this might be something you want to use. So on the far side on the studio here in like a minute, there are a few things that it can automatically create for you. It can create a study guide, an FAQ, a briefing document, and a timeline. So just an example of what some of those things might look like. Here's the study guide, right? Here you have some questions that you might want to answer. Here's the answer key to those questions. Here are some long form essay questions, and here's a glossary of important terms, right? So this might be something that really helps understand what those sources are about or what the main point of those sources are. I think another really great one is the timeline here. So it provides a timeline based on your sources again, right? So here's a long kind of timeline of transnational care, but then it also provides a cast of characters. So who's important to that conversation, including like key figures, family members, migrant care workers, right? All related to your research question. One thing that I did not do because I find it kind of creepy is that you can create this audio overview. And so what it does is it'll take your sources and then it'll create a kind of podcast style conversation between two generated AI voices that will kind of talk back and forth about the content. And then you can like join the conversation and ask a question and then they'll respond to your question. So again, I found that way too creepy to try, but maybe y'all want to do that. So please let me know how that goes. I think that is it. Yeah, so just quickly some things to leave you with. There are different tool differences, right? There's different scopes, there's different interactions. So just kind of keep this in mind when you approach a tool so that you can kind of maybe temper your expectations a little bit. A lot of these tools don't allow room for exploration. It's very focused on your research questions. So depending on where you're at in the research process, depending on what you want students to learn, maybe this tool isn't the best thing to use. And then I think something that we really always need to talk about is that foundational knowledge is still very, very important, right? Understanding your discipline, understanding your research question really helps you evaluate the tool and evaluate the sources that you're looking at. So that's still fundamental. If you are interested in these tools, if you want to talk to us about something, you can use this QR code to get to our research guide. I apologize for the Google dinosaur. But yeah, so we have a whole guide about different tools, about how to use them. I lead a workshop that's later on in February. So we are very open to conversation about these things.
I will say, and just as you were talking, because we've mentioned a lot about using these tools and they were designed for like people doing systematic reviews. It's still, because you can't document your actual search process because it's a black box that is AI, it's great for exploring and finding those things and discovering like kind of all those different pockets of things that might be relevant to you, but you still have to use library databases in order to be able to document an actual search process if you're doing an official systematic review. So yes, can't use these only for that.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful job. I have a quick question and then we can open it up. We have a few minutes to the audience for questions. How good is this at being accurate about timelines? I've had students who have done stuff in research papers and the generative AI will give them a date here and then the same thing some other place, a different date, and it was not accurate at all. Does Google LM do a better job, or this tool?
Yeah, so like I was saying, Google is based on the sources that you upload to it, right? So if your sources are comprehensive, then you have a better chance of getting a comprehensive timeline. If your sources are very specific, then you might not get the best timeline that could be offered, right? The
Okay.
one that was in the example was, I thought, pretty good, pretty comprehensive.
Because it's based its answer on the actual documents itself and not its training data. So it's possible your students were doing it just in regular old ChatGPT, which is going back to its training data. It was just sort of like, I don't know, this is kind of what I know, you know, instead of being like, based on these sources, here's your answer, is the difference.
Can you share a notebook LM with your students? Say you prepare a bunch of articles and topics and ideas and then say, this is a really good thing for this specific paper. Can you share all that work that you've already done with a group of people?
You can share it. There are some limitations with the free account. I believe with the paid account, if you have like a .edu or some sort of institutional affiliation, then you can work across it together or do a view only option. But with the free version, you can share it, but there are some limitations.
And this question may be for CTE folks, but I'm wondering, are there some best practices or some like intro tools that some tools that you might highlight for younger or less mature grad students in terms of like the whole, like learning how to research well? Are there tools that, or workshops or something that you would recommend for grad students who need to develop that skill more, but still maybe using some of these tools?
Yeah, we got you on that one.
Yeah, librarians.
That's what we do. Yeah.
Like, but where would I send my grad students?
To their disciplinary librarian.
There's
So
a
what-
disciplinary
what is
librarian.
your-
Mhm.
What is your discipline?
Math.
Oh,
So that's
okay.
Sylvia.
Yeah, Sylvia, exactly. And
Mhm.
we offer workshops. We do things.
We come
online.
teach in your class. I mean, we teach some workshops. I have a lit review workshop.
Mhm.
She's got a Gen AI workshop. But mostly it's going to be interactions with your subject librarian, and we are full service.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. That was exceptionally informative.